the Earth's true position in the universe, comparatively recent formation, present chemical condition, and approaching destruction by fire. It has been demonstrated that the Earth is a plane, the surface center of which is immediately underneath the star called Polaris, and the extremities of which are bounded by a vast region of ice and water and irregular masses of land, which bear evidence of plutonic or fiery action and origin. In the geological structure of extreme northern regions, the sedimentary strata are abundant and of vast extent, while the constitution of Antarctic strata seems, on the contrary, as far yet examined, entirely igneous. The whole terminates in fog and darkness, where snow and driving hail, piercing sleet and boisterous winds, howling storms, madly mounting waves, and clashing icebergs are almost constant. The waves rise like mountains in height. Ships are heaved up to the clouds and apparently precipitated by circling whirlpools to the bed of the ocean. The winds are piercing cold and so boisterous that the pilot's voice can seldom be heard, whilst a dismal and almost continual darkness adds greatly to the danger. Far in the gloom and darkness of the south this wilderness of storm and battling elements extends, there is at present no evidence. All we can say is that man, with all his mightiest daring and power of endurance, has only succeeded in reaching the threshold of this restless, dark, and forbidding region of the material world. The earth rests upon and within the waters of the great deep. It is a vast floating island, buoyed up by the waters and held in its place by long spurs of land shooting into the icy barriers of the southern circumference. Geological researches demonstrate that it was originally a stratified structure, definite and regular in form and extent, and that all the confused and irregular formations observable in almost every part have resulted from internal convulsions. Chemical analysis proves to us the important fact that the great bulk of the earth, meaning thereby the land, as distinct from the waters, is composed of metallic oxides, or metals in combination with oxygen, and also with sulfur, chlorine, carbon, and other elements. When means are taken to remove the oxygen, it is found that many of these metallic bases are highly combustible. Experiments with electric and other subtle powers of nature render it obvious that all the elements of the earth were originally in a state of gaseous solution, or dissolved in the great menstruum of the material world, electricity. That by a sudden abstraction of this great and universal solvent, the elements were liberated, and owing to the different affinities and relative densities which had been attached to them, combination, precipitation, stratification, crystallization, and concretion successively occurred, giving rise to all the rocks, minerals, ores, deposits, and strata, which now constitute the material habitable world. That by the action of unconcrete or gaseous, unprecipitated elements and free electric and actinic forces upon pre-existing germs, all the numerous forms of animal and vegetable life were brought into being, and are now maintained. However great such operations may seem to the mind of present man, all the vast structure of the physical world, and its innumerable myriads of organic beings, were the work of only a few hours. It is easily demonstrable that so rapid and intense were the processes and chemical changes, that a few days, such as we now understand by the word, were ample time to bring out of invisible, imponderable chaos all the tangible and varied elements which now exist, and to develop every possible form of beauty and elegance, and every condition of happiness and wisdom. All opinions to the contrary which are held by philosophers of the present day are the result of insufficient perception of the whole subject, which insufficient perception is again the result of self-imposed hypotheses, which bias the judgment and confuse the understanding. No man, however learned and accomplished he may be, is able to understand the simple processes of creative effort, unless he is himself a simple and humble observer of phenomena, free from the prejudices of education, and anxious only for a knowledge of the truth as it exists in reality, and not in desire and imagination. Not only is it readily demonstrable that the material world was brought into being rapidly, perfect in structure and fully sufficient in all its conditions, but that only a few thousand years have elapsed since it began to change in form and character. Mental and moral confusion followed by a decomposition in chemical and electric action, sufficient to ignite a great portion of the earth, and to reduce it to a molten incandescent state. Hence for ages the earth has been on fire, the volatile products of this internal fire being forcibly eliminated, and occasionally accumulating and exploding, have broken up the stratified formations and produced the irregular, confused condition which we now observe. Hence have arisen earthquakes, volcanoes, and other convulsions of nature. The products of volcanic action enable us to ascertain the character of the internal fire, and what are the elements concerned in the combustion. Some of these products are of a poisonous character, and being thrown out in immense volumes from craters in various parts of the earth, are dispersed by the wind and diffused through the atmosphere, often in such proportions as to act as deadly poison on both animal and vegetable life. Hence, blight and pestilence in various forms, destroying crops and inferior animals, and affecting numbers of human beings to suffering and death. When we consider the composition of the earth and its aqueous foundations, that it is a vast structure of metallic oxides, sulfurates, and chlorides, intermingled with immense strata of compounds of carbon and hydrogen, and that, as we have already shown, a great portion of the lower parts of the earth is in a molten incandescent state, the earth itself is an extended plain, resting in and upon the waters of the great deep, fitly comparable to a large vessel or ship floating at anchor, with its hold or lower compartments beneath the waterline filled with burning materials. Our knowledge of the nature and action of fire does not enable us to understand in what way the combustion can be prevented from extending when these burning materials are known to be surrounded with highly inflammable substances. Wherever a fire is surrounded with heterogeneous materials, some highly combustible and others partially or indirectly so, it is not possible in the ordinary course of nature for it to remain continually in the same condition, nor to diminish in extent and intensity. It must necessarily increase and extend itself. That this is the case is corroborated by many phenomena. The total of volcanic action is greater than it has ever been since man commenced to observe and record his observations. As the fire is gradually increasing and creeping upwards towards the thousands of miles of veins and strata filled with carbonaceous fuel, it is not possible, unless the course of nature is arrested by some special interference, for the earth to remain in its present concrete condition. The day is not far distant, nay, even now at any moment some sudden convulsive upheaving of the fiery gulf below, until it reaches and lays bare some of the lower beds of hydrocarbon, which dip at various angles from the general strata, may set them on fire. The flames would then rapidly extend and the fiery action swiftly run along the various and innumerable veins of combustible matter, which ramify in every direction throughout the whole earth. Should such an action once commence, knowing as we do that the rocks and minerals and general constituents of the earth are only oxides of inflammable bases, or of substances directly combustible, that the affinities of these are greatly altered in the presence of highly heated carbon and hydrogen, we see clearly that such a chemical action or fire would rapidly increase in intensity, and fiercely rush in all directions, until the whole earth, with everything entering into its composition and dwelling upon and within it, would perish, decompose, and volatilize, and burst into one vast, indescribable, annihilating conflagration, the elements burning with fervent heat, again dissolving in the great solvent medium, electricity, there to remain until some creative mandate shall liberate and again precipitate and stratify them for the formation of another world, perhaps less discordant and more enduring than the present. If we saw a number of persons on some huge raft, tossed up and down on the surface of the ocean, we should naturally feel alarmed for their safety, and if we were told that so far from being apprehensive of danger they fancied their position one of imminent security, that they pointed with pride to the thickness and solidity of the timber under their feet, laughing to scorn every suggestion that their footing might by and by prove less sound than they imagined, we should conclude that their minds must be strangely constituted. Does it not seem extraordinary then that so little should be thought of a position far more perilous, in which all the inhabitants of the earth are continually placed? Their position resembles, more nearly than we most of us think, that of persons floating on the surface of the sea, on a raft of great strength and thickness, it is true, but yet not proof against the fury of the waves, and liable to sudden disruption of its parts. The only difference is that the sea on which we are floating is a sea of liquid fire, the molten elements of the main substance of the earth.
Hi guys, so welcome back to Flat Water, Flat Earth. It's been a little while since I've done the episode where I'm just talking to you from my own point of view as opposed to reading to you from a book. So today we're going to look at the Antikythera mechanism, and this is an interesting piece because many people use the Antikythera mechanism and discuss the Antikythera mechanism as a way of showing that ancient cultures had a high level of technology, and people use it as a mystery object in their top 10 lists of top 10 most amazing finds and devices, etc. So there's been a video on YouTube for some time saying, 3,000-year-old clock found underwater, 3,000-year-old timepiece found underwater. There's lots of different ways that you can describe this piece and this mechanism, this Antikythera mechanism and device. So, why am I talking about the Antikythera mechanism? Why is it? What does it have to do with flat Earth? Well, one other amazing thing about the Antikythera mechanism is that it itself proves Earth flat. After being found for many years, nobody could decode the gears in it and get it to work properly. I'll show you some of the photos here. I have to be careful for copyright that I don't play some of these people's movies, or it'll come up as a copyright problem, so I just have to show you stills. But there's this gentleman, and he's the one who finally cracked the Antikythera mechanism and determined how it functioned, what the gear ratio was for it. Before this, we had lots of X-ray technicians and lots of studies. People studied the Antikythera mechanism for a long time, for 30, 40 some odd years. So after they found the Antikythera mechanism, no one could properly rebuild it. We worked for a long time to properly rebuild the mechanism in the way that it was originally. So many scientists and engineers and gear workers and mechanics and lots of people tried to piece this thing back together. And every time that they put it together, it wouldn't function properly. It wouldn't actually function in any meaningful way, until this man plugged in the geocentric flat Earth coordinates for the planets above. When he put in the gearings using the geocentric model, the Ptolemaic geocentric static plane Earth ratios for the movements of the planets and the wandering stars, the luminaries, once he put in the coordinates of a geocentric model for Mars and the other gear systems of the other planets, it all fell into place, and the Antikythera mechanism came to life and worked. And another amazing part about the Antikythera mechanism that disassembles the argument used by many NASA fans saying that flat Earth can't be real because NASA is able to predict eclipses, and yet the Antikythera mechanism, this ancient device using geocentric figures, predicts eclipses with incredible accuracy. The metonic cycle. So there's much more to discuss about the Antikythera mechanism that we've left over from some other projects, including Enoch, and also, the Earth, the flat Earth itself, and how old exactly is the flat Earth. another part of this topic, which is what turns it into such a large topic. The Metonic cycle is the cycle of the luminaries, the cycle of the bodies that move above the earth, that we call the wandering stars, the planets, the moon, the sun, and any other dark orbs or luminous bodies that are moving above our heads in the sky. So the Metonic cycle is the cycle of those movements and how often they repeat. So there are different versions of the Metonic cycle, and the most common description we have of it is that it's a 19-year cycle. At least that the longest portion of that cycle is 19 years, I should say. So this is a very complex topic, and this is where we can get into the Hebrew calendar and the Enochian calendar, and using the Metonic cycle and piecing that back together, we should be able to figure out, with the lunar eclipses, we should be able to figure out what year it is. So this is one of those things that it ties into all of our study, all the things that we've been studying here, including the Russian New Earth project, where they talk about the Russian teacher, the Russian researcher who has affected what's called the Scaliger timeline. The Scaliger timeline is the one that the Vatican put together supposedly using a king's list, using king's lists and history, all the best historical books that they have and access that they have, and then supposedly using again the Metonic cycle and the eclipses. So he says, I forget the guy's name, it's Leonid or Lenivin, something like that. You can find him in some of my other movies on Flat Water, my first few movies about the survivors in Flat Earth, and you can also find it at New Earth and other places about the Scaliger timeline. So the Russian researcher says that Earth is off by about 1,000 years, that the Scaliger timeline is off by about 1,000 years. And I would agree that we're off by quite a bit, and it could easily be 1,000 years. So this is something that we'll look further into. I'm looking at another religious organization that was affiliated with the Seventh-day Adventists in the mid-1800s, and supposedly they found another version of a Metonic cycle that is not just the Hebrew one. It's actually a modification of the Hebrew, and supposedly, according to them, it's more accurate than the Hebrew version of the Metonic cycle and version of the calendar. So it's something that I'm going to continue to look further into, and I'm going to have to develop I'm going to develop something up out of that. So we'll look forward to that. Don't be looking for that, in the next few weeks or in the next few days. As you can see, as I've been mentioning here, it's quite a large topic, so it's going to take me some time to really piece it together better. I don't want to just come out and discuss this and then not have the full detail that it deserves and requires. So stay tuned. We will get to that. It's something that I'm looking into and keeping my thumb on, keeping my finger on at all times. So as soon as I can find more about it, I'll let you guys know. So is there anything else I want to discuss about the Metonic cycle? Okay, well, in general, NASA fanboys love to use, and globularists love to say, hey, flat earthers, you guys are retarded, flat earth doesn't work. We know so because how come NASA can predict eclipses and you guys can't? And isn't it funny that it's actually the geocentric figures, the geocentric model, that allows us to predict eclipses, and not the heliocentric model. And it was done, and it is still done to this day, using these devices and using this Metonic calendar based on the geocentric model. So now I'm going to link the original movie so that you guys can watch the original with all the detail from the actual scientist himself, explaining that he needed to input the geocentric rings, the geocentric model for Mars and for the other wandering stars, and that then the Antikythera mechanism magically came to life and worked and began to predict eclipses.
For astronomy and calendar studies, the Metonic cycle or Annada Coeteris is a period of very close to 19 years that is remarkable for being nearly a common multiple of the solar year and the synodic month. The Greek astronomer Meton of Athens observed that a period of 19 years is almost exactly equal to 235 synodic months and, rounded to full days, counts 6,940 days. The difference between the two periods is only a few hours, depending on the definition of the year. Considering a year to be 1/19 of the 6,940-day cycle gives a year length of 365 plus 1 4 plus 1 76 days, which is slightly more than 12 synodic months. To keep a 12-month lunar year in pace with the solar year, an intercalary 13th month would have to be added on 7 occasions during the 19-year period. When Meton introduced the cycle around 432 BC, it was already known by Babylonian astronomers. A mechanical computation of the cycle is built into the Antikythera mechanism. The cycle was used in the Babylonian calendar, ancient Chinese calendar systems and the medieval computers. It regulates the 19-year cycle of intercalary months of the modern Hebrew calendar. Mathematical basis: at the time of Meton, axial precession had not yet been discovered, and he could not distinguish between sidereal years and tropical years. Most calendars, like the commonly used Gregorian calendar, are based on the tropical year and maintain the seasons at the same calendar times each year. 19 tropical years are about 2 hours shorter than 235 synodic months. The Metonic cycle's error is, therefore, 1 full day every 219 years, or 12.4 parts per million. 19 tropical years equals 6,939.602 days. 235 synodic months equals 6,939.688 days. 254 sidereal months equals 6,939.702 days. 255 draconic months equals 6,939.1161 days. Note that the 19-year cycle is also close to 255 draconic months, so it is also an eclipse cycle, which lasts only for about 4 or 5 recurrences of eclipses. The octon is one of 5 of a Metonic cycle, and it recurs about 20 to 25 cycles. This cycle seems to be a coincidence. An example of a non-coincidental cycle is the orbit of Mercury, with its 3-2 spin orbit resonance. A lunar year of 12 synodic months is about 354 days, approximately 11 days short of the 365-day solar year. Therefore, for a lunisolar calendar, every 2 to 3 years there is a difference of more than a full lunar month between the lunar and solar years, and an extra month needs to be inserted. The Athenians initially seem not to have had a regular means of intercalating a 13th month. Instead, the question of when to add a month was decided by an official. Meton's discovery made it possible to propose a regular intercalation scheme. The Babylonians seem to have introduced this scheme around 500 BC, thus well before Meton. Application in traditional calendars: traditionally, for the Babylonian and Hebrew lunisolar calendars, the years 3, 6, 8, 11, 14, 17 and 19 are the long years of the Metonic cycle. This cycle, which can be used to predict eclipses, forms the basis of the Greek and Hebrew calendars, and is used for the computation of the date of Easter each year. The Babylonians applied the 19-year cycle since the late 6th century BC. As they measured the moon's motion against the stars, the 235-19 relationship may originally have referred to sidereal years, instead of tropical years as it has been used for various calendars. Apollo was said to have visited the Hyperboreans once every 19 years, presumably at the high point of the cycle. The runic calendar is a perpetual calendar based on the 19-year-long Metonic cycle. Also known as a rune staff or runic almanac, it appears to have been a medieval Swedish invention. This calendar does not rely on knowledge of the duration of the tropical year or of the occurrence of leap years. It is set at the beginning of each year by observing the first full moon after the winter solstice. The oldest one known, and the only one from the Middle Ages, is the Nicca-paragraph Ping staff, which is believed to date from the 13th century. The Bahar calendar, established during the middle of the 19th century, is also based on cycles of 19 years. Further details: the Metonic cycle is related to two less accurate subcycles, 8 years equals 99 lunations to within 1.5 days, that is an error of 1 day in 5 years. And 11 years equals 136 lunations within 1.5 days, that is an error of 1 day and 7.3 years. By combining appropriate numbers of 11-year and 19-year periods, it is possible to generate ever more accurate cycles. For example, simple arithmetic shows that 687 tropical years equals 250,921.39 days. 8,497 lunations equals 250,921.41 days. This gives an error of only about half an hour in 687 years, although this is subject to secular variation in the length of the tropical year and the lunation. Meton of Athens approximated the cycle to a whole number of days, obtained by 125 long months of 30 days and 110 short months of 29 days. During the next century, Caulippus developed the Caulippic cycle of 4 19-year periods for a 76-year cycle with a mean year of exactly 365.25 days.
The Earth's true position in the universe, comparatively recent formation, present chemical condition, and approaching destruction by fire. It has been demonstrated that the Earth is a plane, the surface center of which is immediately underneath a star called Polaris, and the extremities of which are bounded by a vast region of ice and water and irregular masses of land, which bear evidence of plutonic or fiery action and origin. In the geological structure of extreme northern regions, the sedimentary strata are abundant and of vast extent, while the constitution of Antarctic strata seems, on the contrary, as far yet examiners of the great deep. It is a vast floating island, buoyed up by the waters and held in its place by long spurs of land shooting into the icy barriers of the southern circumference. Geological researches demonstrate that it was originally a stratified structure, definite and regular in form and extent, and that all the confused and irregular formations observable in almost every part have resulted from internal convulsions. Chemical analysis proves to us the important fact that the great bulk of the Earth, meaning thereby the land, as distinct from the waters, is composed of metallic oxides, or metals in combination with oxygen, and also with sulfur, chlorine, carbon, and other elements. When means are taken to remove the oxygen, it is found that many of these metallic bases are highly combustible. Experiments with electric and other subtle powers of nature render it obvious that all the elements of the Earth were originally in a state of gaseous solution, or dissolved in the great menstruum of the material world, electricity. That by a sudden abstraction of this great and universal solvent, the elements were liberated, and owing to the different affinities and relative densities which had been attached to them, combination, precipitation, stratification, crystallization, and concretion successively occurred, giving rise to all the rocks, minerals, ores, deposits, and strata, which now constitute the material habitable world. That by the action of unconcrete or gaseous unprecipitated elements and free electric and actinic forces upon pre-existing germs, all the numerous forms of animal and vegetable life were brought into being, and are now maintained. However great such operations may seem to the mind of present man, all the vast structure of the physical world, and its innumerable myriads of organic beings, were the work of only a few hours, It is easily demonstrable that so rapid and intense were the processes and chemical changes, that a few days, such as we now understand by the word, were ample time to bring out of invisible, imponderable chaos all the tangible and varied elements which now exist, and to develop every possible form of beauty and elegance, and every condition of happiness and wisdom. All opinions to the contrary which are held by philosophers of the present day are the result of insufficient perception of the whole subject, which insufficient perception is again the result of self-imposed hypotheses, which bias the judgment and confuse the understanding. No man, however learned and accomplished he may be, is able to understand the simple processes of creative effort, unless he is himself a simple and humble observer of phenomena, free from the prejudice and entirely igneous. The whole terminates in fog and darkness, where snow and driving hail, piercing sleet and boisterous winds, howling storms, madly mounting waves, and clashing icebergs are almost constant. The waves rise like mountains in height. Ships are heaved up to the clouds and apparently precipitated by circling whirlpools to the bed of the ocean. The winds are piercing cold and so boisterous that the pilot's voice can seldom be heard, whilst a dismal and almost continual darkness adds greatly to the danger. Far in the gloom and darkness of the south this wilderness of storm and battling elements extends, there is at present no evidence. All we can say is that man, with all his mightiest daring and power of endurance, has only succeeded in reaching the threshold of this restless, dark, and forbidding region of the material world. The earth rests upon and within the water